This is such an important video for the Imperial Palace on Terra. By the end of today, we are finally going to have this beast of a Warhammer mega board ready for gaming. Over the last 9 videos, we've done some awesome work, but it hasn't been without its issues. This is an insanely modular board with a whole bunch of different ways to set it up. But this is the master layout, a layout to control all others. And into this layout I have poured my foam, my plastic crack, and my will to dominate my own sanity.
We've been building this board together in chunks, moving around the structure, working on different parts to give you guys that nice completionist dopamine as each part of this monster layout comes to life. But that means that a bunch of areas of the board are at different stages of completion, and a few pieces have been basically left completely unattended.
So today we'll not only be touching up some neglected areas of the palace, but also adding some brand new ones to get this whole board ready for some Warhammer battle reports like you've never seen before.
Our first job is to assess the state of the overall build. The Imperial Palace is obviously a massive location, and the final board will be insanely detailed, but I've created a series of checkpoints for the mega board, different stages of finishedness that will allow us to get a monster board that's playable and looks fantastic for gameplay, but can still be added to and improved as the build progresses.
Here we have the first gatehouse, the trench, and the lower city. These pieces have got a nice level of detail in the stonework and the rampart, and the foundational paint job as well.
They look like a nice cohesive piece, but this is just the first stage of the palace's journey. From here we will be entering a huge phase of hyper detailing, adding a whole bucket load of gold details and metal banding and plating to accent the grey stonework underneath.
But for now, it's good enough to game on. Other parts of the board are not so advanced. This big tower needs more detailing and a bunch more paintwork. The second gatehouse needs a bunch more fortifications and defensive positions. The second trench is in a sorry state. We need some bracing, some buttresses, accents, and of course, some gates so that this lower gangway is actually usable. But the biggest problem of all is something that you guys can't even see. Here underneath the lower city we have a new square table to better suit the layout up above, but it's taller than the original table, which has completely thrown out the structural engineering of the first 2 trenches. Not to mention these 2 outer walls of the lower city are completely missing, and this part looks like it's falling off into a chasm. My goodness, we have a lot of work to do.
Our first task is one of the most important. The foundation of the lower city is a hot mess. We need new foam paneling to skirt the table so it's completely hidden beneath the streets, and the city sector needs some increased width to make the layout work properly. I started with some big sheets of XPS foam and then dived into my bits box and grabbed all of my off-cut pieces of epic scale road tiles, which will be perfect for bulking out the city blocks above our new trench walls to allow for much more modularity for our larger buildings. At the moment, they can really only go in a few central spots in the city layout. I began to work on the first wall section, carving in the same trench brickwork pattern with my knife as all our previous trench walls, a mix of different block sizes to create some nice visual interest, and then just as always widen those cuts with a pencil and then textured the emperor out of it with bricky and foily. This firmer skinned XPS foam really needs a fair amount of force to impart texture, but when the skin cracks it looks really nice for massive stone blocks weathered by the Himalayan winds of the Imperial Palace. This piece just balances against the table, and then the spare foam surface slides underneath the existing floor panels to give them some extra support. And then I mounted another section of wall sloping back into the city tiles. This not only creates a nice visual, if all the walls are just flat planes it looks super boring, but I also need the walls to sit underneath the existing roadway on this side. There will be a huge bridge that comes off this road here to join to an entirely new city sector. I blended the edge of this new wall with our first trench with a nice little bastion jutting out on an angle. This will become like a nice little gun emplacement in the future, and again helps to break up those boring straight lines, adding detail at a structural level that can then be blinged out later. And then it was time to smash out our last remaining wall panels. I spent a bit of time cutting all of the panels to the right size and tried to create more interesting shapes similar to our first wall but in reverse, starting right under the existing floor tiles for for the second roadway to eventually meet a bridge like the first one, and then widening out substantially to create heaps more real estate for more ruined buildings. Then it was just a massive process of texturing. I marked up and sliced all the horizontal brick lines in the studio, but it was just so damn cold. It was about -2 at 8 in the morning, so I fled inside to my office to continue the texturing. Ironically, at the time I was working on this part of the build, I was listening to Prospero Burns by Dan Abnett again, and as Gareth Armstrong was describing the freezing cold conditions on Fenris, my breath was misting in the studio, and I kept slipping on chunks of ice in my backyard, moving between the main studio and my office. It all felt really appropriate. I carved the remaining brickwork and widened all the grout, and then curled up on the floor right next to my heater and smashed in all the texture with Bricky, and then jumped back out into the studio to start mounting the panels in place. The first panel got glued to our first wall under the roadway, and then I jumped to the second wall and began working from the wider section, building up my wall layers at different angles to create that widened city sector. I had to get clever with my bracing and supports, but of course these are hidden underneath the table, so they just need to be strong, not pretty, which makes the structural engineering a lot easier. I then grabbed my epic scale plastic road tile offcuts and mounted them onto our new city extension, cutting them to the right size to fill out the space. I am so happy to see this finally done. Back when I did the shoot for Warhammer Community, I had skirts on this part of the board, but they all got stolen for the second trench when it was built, so to see the table hidden once again and the widened city sector is very promising. But of course, getting ready for battle reports isn't just about the board we play on, but the studio itself. So I reached out to Displate last week, and they threw down their support behind the studio glow up and had 7 absolutely gorgeous, one-of-a-kind metal posters on my doorstep within like 5 business days. I've already had my Middle-earth displays up in my office for 6 months, but this time I could not go past these amazing Warhammer designs. There were so many cool choices, so I decided to try and match displays to the armies that are going to go in my new army display case. Ultramarines for my horde of Heresy Ultras, Necrons, Imperial Guard, and then some demons for my Legion of Wordbearers. Displays have a unique, easy, safe magnet mounting system which is super easy to install and makes positioning them on the wall really simple. I threw these in my office, swapping out my Middle-earth ones, but because they are metal, I had an even cooler idea and mounted them directly to my garage door to make the ultimate studio backdrop.
Displate also sent me 2 of their new textured displays, which have like 3D contouring and selective matte and gloss elements and this kind of tactile texture. I think they might pop really nicely as backgrounds in my new display case. Use my link down in the description or code Zorpazorp to get 25% off 1 or 35% off 2 or more, which is a monster deal that Displate have brought to you guys as a thank you for supporting them so much the last time we worked together. And I just love Displate, so please support them so that they can keep sending me displays and supporting everything I do here at Zorpazorp.
It's time to make things all sexy and detailed, just like Daddy E would want. First up, it's time to just make an absolute bucket load of foam stripping we can turn into a bunch of detailed bracing and buttresses. These are just layered strips of foam textured with a plain uniform brickwork pattern at a scale that will be quite noticeably smaller than the large stones of the main wall. This will set them apart and helps the whole wall read really nicely. Without some ornamentation, all of our new skirting just looks like flat sheets of foam, even with the brickwork we've already carved, but by building layers upon it, it emphasizes all of the stonework as a whole. I worked out I needed 27 of these buttresses because I've actually got a lot of walls that need them, not just our new skirting. Honestly, a lot of what we're achieving today is catching up on parts of the build that I had already intended to finish but had to cut out of previous videos because I just ran out of time. And it is so damn exciting to be able to see how this entire board is just going to jump up a huge level of quality by the end of this video. With both sizes of foam cut that I needed, I jumped back into my office next to the heater and got to work, doing a massive production line effort to efficiently build 27 buttresses at once, starting off with the larger 20mm pieces. I lined them all up and painstakingly carved in the brickwork pattern on one side of the buttress on all 27 at once. Once widened with my pencil, I could now take each piece individually and wrap that grout line around the pillar to expand the detail to all 3 sides of the buttress. This was a mammoth fourth task. I sure wish I could move as fast as I do in these time lapses, because this alone took hours. I also cut the top chamfer at this stage, and then our next phase is weathering. This is unskinned foam, so thankfully this is pretty easy. It's just a lengthy phase of rolling in stone texture with scrunched up aluminium foil, and then a few little detail accents with bricky to get a nice mix of textures. As I was slicing all this foam, I actually recorded a podcast on my mates Alex and John's amazing Cast It Into the Fire, a hilarious podcast about wargaming with this wicked debate game show format. And this week we discussed all the various controversies around wargaming terrain. I'll link it down below, go and give it a listen while you're hobbying this week. Then, with all 27 big strips finished, it's time to repeat the entire process on 27 small strips. And at first I thought this would be way faster, but of course the brick pattern is even smaller, so it ended up being about the same amount of work. The only little speed gain I made was carving my first grout line into the front of the strip, which meant that I then had two very small sides to finish individually, which I could actually do with just the pencil, and I didn't need my scalpel, so that cut out one step. More texture rolling, which was a bit gnarly with these strips being so thin, but once that was all done, I slapped them down back in the studio, and it is assembly time. I glued all the thin strips onto the base of the thicker strips to make 27 lovely double-layered buttresses, although I've got a nice mix of subtle variations, with strips of different lengths and heights in different combinations. I laid these all out throughout the entire trenches except for our first, wherever all our flat walls are in dire need of some bling, and then got to work gluing them all in place with liquid nails. Starting at our first new table skirt, I just loved two buttresses accenting our little bastion that juts out around the corner. It really gives some lovely detail around those forms, which ties in beautifully to the detail level of the first trench, which is super blinged up, and then two more down our next wall, and another three wrapping down the second half, with some shorter strips underneath where our future bridges will join this wall to leave room for some nice bridge supports in the future. Then finally, our second trench and the trench that runs beneath the massive tower. I have been wanting these buttresses done for ages, and wow, it is satisfying to finally see them in place. But there is a lot more work to be done here, which we'll hop back to in a second. But for now, just look how much those simple foam strips have already added to the build. The walls are just absolutely singing.
A big shout out to all of my patrons and YouTube channel members. You guys have been amazing supporting this crazy project and the channel more broadly. I have been spamming our Patreon Discord with work in progress photos, keeping you guys all updated as this build comes together, which has been really, really fun. So just thank you so much. And I've also been working on the banners. We're gonna have banners and carved names and little statues all over this build for the different tiers of my Patreon and my YouTube channel members. So if you want your name on the Zorpazorp Imperial Palace mega board, go and check out Patreon, or you can become a YouTube channel member right here on YouTube. Or if you just want to make a one-off supporting gesture of this project, you can throw a super chat down in the comments. Thank you so much to my Patreons, my channel members, my super chatters. You guys are just amazing.
We do need one more critical detail on our lower city, however, so I threw a bunch more foam stripping through the hot wire cutter to make our mini battlements to run around the city. I textured these strips with a really simple brickwork pattern. Simple is key here to keep this battlement scale agnostic, and then painstakingly mounted them all around the rim of our new walls, leaving gaps for our future bridges, and being sure to glue them to the right sheet of foam so that both the walls and the floor tiles are all still fully removable and modular. Then I laid out all our ruined buildings for the first time in the new city sector layout, and the added space is just an absolute God Emperor send. This is going to massively improve the gameplay in this region. But I can't stay like this for now. We need to get deeper into the city, so I ripped it all up, yoinked out the central table, which is of course now fully hidden underneath the city, and took away our two new walls to reveal our next task. Here, we can see our two trenches are currently propped up on some foam blocks because the increased height of that new square table meant that my original walls were too short. So it's time to make a little height boost permanent, starting with the single wall of trench 2. It's vital we do this now because this baby is about to be mounted to the other half of the trench with walkways and bridges, so some 20mm foam stripping carved into a nice brick texture gives us the boost that we need. With Trench 2 looking great, it's time for Trench 1, who is of course a monster structure, and flipping this beast over by myself was dicey to say the least, but we got there. And then this guy needs just a bunch more foam stripping, not just for the wall extension, but of course the original pillars need some high heels too, and a booster seat for our bridge column.
This fortnight's video is all about getting this board ready for battle reports, but what those battle reports are is kind of still to be decided, and you guys are gonna help me choose. We've got 3 options. First, Dawn of War Warhammer, some awesome action battling across the Imperial Palace with a whole bunch of different faction options, or some Siege of Terra games in either epic scale, Legions Imperialis, or in 28mm scale, normal Horus Heresy. So, Horus Heresy big or small, or some Dawn of War Warhammer action. I've got a comment thread going down for each of those options in the comments, so go and reply to that thread with what you'd like to see, or if you've got any suggestions on what factions you'd like to see, throw it all down in the comments, and together we can decide what battle reports happen on the Imperial Palace over on the Battle Report channel, Zorphammer. I'll link that down in the description as well, so you can go and subscribe and be ready and waiting for the first Imperial Palace battle reports over on Zorphammer.
While all the trenches are disassembled, it's the perfect time to finish detailing our second trench, and the major missing detail is of course the gateways for our lower walkway. I kept these much simpler than the original ones on our first trench, basically because I'm out of plastic kit pieces to jazz them up, but with a bit of nice stone carving on both walls, we still get a nice aesthetic. A couple of extra buttresses with the 2 layers of brickwork tied in nicely to all the other ones we've installed throughout the trenches, and help to build up the detail on this first archway. And our second archway I cut just to the right size so that the trim around the arch would mesh perfectly with the walkway battlements. Then I grabbed our lower walkway and glued it in place to our first wall using skewers to keep it kind of mounted firmly in place so that I can then sit the wall up and then skewered it to its neighbor so that it was all standing perfectly upright, and then installed the second wall, gluing it to the other side of the archway. Then it's time to work on the main bridge, which at the moment is just a sort of top platform. So first, this structure needs some bulking, some nice detailed chamfered foam stripping added to the base, gave it some foamy gains, as well as a bit of foam continuing downwards from those lovely triangular crenellations on both sides. So I'm going to get this beast mounted as well to give our trench structure 2 mounting points. More liquid nails and skewers, and then I can leave all of that to dry overnight for a nice strong bond. With our lower gangway now functional, we need to do some work on the upper battlement, namely a bunch of foundation texture and of course an elevator shaft to access the bridge gate below. I started by grabbing some really thin, unskinned foam sheeting and mounting it to the bare structural foam behind the gatehouse, and then working in a nice simple large flagstone texture. Really happy with that look, I moved to the last bare stretch of structural foam along space behind the main wall and set about cutting in an access port for our elevator shaft at the end of one of our roadways. The cut foam got some brickwork texture, and then as I mounted the sheeting and carved in my flagstone texture, I added some more trim to get a lovely looking access port. When it comes to game time, a big building will be plonked down here to function just like our other elevators. Then I dived into a massive phase of painting, but we're basically out of time for this video. But as a reward for you guys for being so patient, it has been 6 weeks since our last Palace video. I surged ahead and got it all painted up, and far out have we achieved some work this fortnight. This board has just jumped up a massive level. I don't know, what do you guys think? Does the complete lower city add a lot to the overall aesthetic, or what's your favorite part so far? Don't forget to comment below for what battle report you'd like to see over on Zorphammer, and strap in because this board is about to get a very exciting update just around the corner.
And remember to use code Zorpazorp at Displate, links down in the description.